In a sprawling executive hangar, a pristine twin-engine helicopter sat ready, its rotors still. CEO Claire Hawthorne paced, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. A $4 billion deal was about to evaporate, all because she had no pilot. Her best was grounded, the backup stranded. Desperate, her furious gaze swept the hangar and landed on a man in faded coveralls, quietly pushing a mop in the corner. Laughter echoed from her executives as she strode toward him. "You," she snapped. "Mop boy, fly this helicopter, get a briefcase to Wall Street, and I'll marry you." The executives howled. But what they didn't know was that they had just mocked the one man who could actually save them, and in doing so, had just unleashed a secret that would leave every single one of them speechless. Claire Hawthorne wasn't just any CEO, she was the formidable, unyielding force behind Hawthorne Aerospace Logistics. Her name alone conjured images of precision, ruthless efficiency, and billion-dollar deals. HAL wasn't merely a company, it was the Pentagon's favorite, and often only, choice for those impossible, last-minute supply runs. The kind that determined the fate of international diplomacy or critical military operations. Claire had built this empire from the ground up, brick by painstaking brick, and she ran it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Losing wasn't in her vocabulary. It was a foreign concept, anathema to her very being. Today, however, the universe seemed to be conspiring against her. 45 minutes. That's all the time she had before the biggest contract signing of her life. A deal that would catapult HAL into a new stratosphere of influence and profit. But chaos reigned. Her chief pilot, a man who'd navigated war zones and blizzards with equal nonchalance, was grounded, a nasty sinus block, making any ascent a literal headache. His backup? Stranded in Denver, thanks to an unexpected blizzard that had shut down DIA. And the client, an Arab prince, whose reputation for punctuality and uncompromising demands preceded him, was already circling impatiently above the Delaware River in his private 767. This wasn't some minor freight delivery. This was a briefcase, a custom-made leather attaché filled not with cash, but with something far more valuable. Signed purchase orders for 30 brand-new Black Hawk helicopters, a deal worth a staggering $4 billion. The briefcase needed to be ferried from Teterborough's executive hangar to a rooftop helipad in Wall Street, a journey that, under normal circumstances, was a routine hop. But with the clock ticking down to 25 minutes, and no pilot in sight, that $4 billion deal was teetering on the brink, threatening to evaporate into thin air like a bad dream. Claire Hawthorne did not lose deals, and the thought of this one slipping through her fingers was a bitter pill she refused to swallow. Her jaw was set, her eyes, usually cool and calculating, now burned with a desperate urgency. And then there was Jack Miller. He was a man of quiet corners and unseen labor, a fixture in the sprawling hangar bays of Hawthorne Aerospace Logistics, yet as invisible as the exhaust fumes he occasionally swept away. His uniform was simple, faded blue coveralls, a name tag that read Jack, and a perpetual, almost serene, calm in his eyes. Those eyes, though, held a depth that belied his unassuming exterior, a quiet intensity that hinted at stories untold, experiences far removed from scrubbing industrial floors. They were the eyes of a man who'd seen rotor blades chew through mountain air at 12,000 feet, who understood the raw power and unforgiving physics of flight in a way most people never would. He was in his element, pushing a ringer across the polished concrete floor, the rhythmic squeak of the wheels, a familiar soundtrack to his day, when the storm that was Claire Hawthorne blew in. Her heels, expensive and sharply pointed, clicked against the floor like rifle bolts, each step a declaration of her mounting fury and frustration. She stormed past a cluster of bewildered executives, her voice cutting through the hangar's ambient hum. "Find me a pilot, Peterson, or find me a resume, because I am absolutely not flying commercial like some tourist, not today." She barked at her VP of operations, a harried man who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 5 minutes. Peterson, a veteran of countless corporate crises, just offered a helpless shrug. He was already on the phone, his team spamming every regional airport within 100 miles, desperate for anyone with a rotorcraft rating and a pulse. Claire spun on her heel, her gaze sweeping the hangar in a desperate search, and that's when her eyes landed on Jack, leaning casually on his mop, watching the unfolding drama with an almost detached interest. Her tone, usually reserved for interns who dared to bring her lukewarm coffee, snapped with impatience and thinly veiled contempt. "You janitor, do you even know what collective pitch is?" The question was rhetorical, laced with an expectation of ignorance. Jack, however, didn't flinch. He slowly straightened up, his movements unhurried, and met her gaze with an unnerving steadiness. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice a low, even rumble. "It's how you go up, down, left, right, and you use your feet for the pedals." A ripple of snickering ran through the assembled executives, a collective sigh of condescension. Claire's lips curled into a smirk, a predatory glint in her eyes. This was perfect, a little light entertainment to distract from the impending disaster. "Tell you what, mop boy," she said, her voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Fly this helicopter, get that briefcase to Wall Street, and I'll marry you. Contracts in 25. Clocks ticking. The air crackled with the sheer audacity of her dare, a challenge thrown not with an ounce of genuine intent, but as a cruel jest at the expense of the company's most humble employee. Jack's gaze shifted from Claire's defiant stare to the sleek, gleaming form of the MD 902 sitting on the pad just beyond the hangar doors. It was a medical configuration bird, a pristine machine designed for precision and speed, its twin Pratt Whitney engines humming a low, powerful thrum like caged lions ready to be unleashed. He wasn't just looking at it, he was seeing it, processing every detail with an almost unconscious expertise. He calculated the aircraft's weight, factoring in the prince's briefcase and an imaginary co-pilot. His mind raced through the wind conditions, a slight crosswind from the west. He mentally cross-referenced the prince's estimated time of arrival, the air traffic control patterns for the Teterboro-Manhattan corridor, and the potential for unexpected delays. For 3 long years, he'd cultivated this invisibility, this quiet existence. Scrubbing floors, replacing flickering light bulbs, collecting paychecks that were just enough to live on, small enough to almost forget. He'd chosen this life, deliberately stepping away from the roar of rotor blades and the unforgiving vastness of the sky. Flying again meant remembering things he desperately wanted to forget, the adrenaline, the terror, the camaraderie, the losses. It meant revisiting the ghosts of a past he'd meticulously buried under layers of mundane routine. But now, seeing that MD 902, feeling the faint vibration of its engines even from a distance, something stirred within him. The cockpit light, that familiar verdant glow of readiness, blinked in his peripheral vision, a silent, insistent call. It was the same green light he'd seen countless times, thousands of miles away, in the dust-choked skies above Kandahar. He slowly, deliberately, rolled his mop bucket aside, the squeak of its wheels, the only sound breaking the tense silence. He walked with an unhurried confidence to a nondescript locker, pulled out a headset that looked well-worn and deeply personal, and turned back to the stunned executives. His voice, still calm, still even, cut through the nervous anticipation. "I'll need a safety pilot signature on the flight release." The VP of Operations, Peterson, who had just managed to regain a semblance of composure, let out a guffaw so loud he choked on the sip of latte he'd just taken, nearly spraying it across a bewildered intern. Claire, however, didn't laugh. Her arms remained tightly folded, her expression unreadable, a flicker of something akin to reluctant admiration, or perhaps just sheer desperation, in her eyes. She stared at Jack, then at Peterson, and finally, with a curt nod, she said, "Sign it. If he crashes, we blame the janitor. If he delivers, I get to say I married for love." The words were sharp, but there was a tremor in her voice, a subtle hint that her carefully constructed world was about to be irrevocably shaken. Jack stepped onto the tarmac, the vast expanse of concrete stretching out before him, the MD 902 waiting like a coiled beast. The corporate crowd, a gaggle of impeccably dressed executives, followed him like a curious, disbelieving entourage, their murmurs and hushed snickers betraying their conviction that this was all just an elaborate, albeit bizarre, joke they hadn't quite finished laughing at, but Jack paid them no mind. His focus was absolute, his movements economical and precise. He began his clockwise walk-around, a ritualistic dance performed with an almost spiritual reverence. His fingertips, calloused from years of gripping controls and now from mop handles, brushed lightly against the tail boom, checking for any anomalies. He ran them over the rotor hub, a complex marvel of engineering, then traced the lines of the oil cooler. Every motion was muscle memory, ingrained from countless hours, thousands of flights. It was a language he spoke fluently, a silent conversation between man and machine. He slid open the cabin door with a practiced ease, his gaze instantly locating the prince's custom briefcase. He checked its strapping, ensuring it was secured perfectly centerline, then climbed into the left seat, the pilot's position. The cockpit, once a place of mundane routine, now hummed with a renewed sense of purpose. From the glass-walled observation deck, Claire watched, her initial smirk having vanished entirely, replaced by a growing knot of anxiety. Her phone was already in hand, speed dialing the company's insurance provider, a pragmatic reflex born of years in the high-stakes world of aerospace. The turbines began to spool up, a rising whine that quickly escalated into a powerful roar, shaking the very foundations of the hangar. Jack's voice, calm and authoritative, crackled over the radio. Helicopter 27 X-ray, IFR to Lower Manhattan, 1 to 0 minutes. Tower cleared him without a beat. A testament to the efficient, if surprised, ground crew. Then came the magic. The blades, initially a blur, seemed to flatten, biting into the air with an almost palpable force. The MD-902 lifted, not with a jolt or a wobble, but with an impossibly smooth, controlled ascent. Its nose remained perfectly straight, its tail steady, as if it were gliding along an invisible rail. It was an ascent that defied gravity and expectation. Claire's smirk didn't just falter, it shattered. Her jaw went slack, her carefully composed executive facade crumbling under the weight of what she was witnessing. Nobody, she knew, climbed that smoothly, that perfectly, without hundreds of hours logged. And nobody, absolutely nobody, climbed like that without hundreds of hours in a war zone. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a janitor, this was a professional, a master of his craft, and his craft was flying. Below, the New Jersey Turnpike was a ribbon of snarled traffic, a frustrating, honking parking lot of red taillights stretching into the hazy distance. But above, Jack was in his element, a ballet of steel and air. He wasn't just talking to air traffic control, he was conversing with them like old friends, his voice steady and calm, issuing instructions and receiving clearances with an effortless familiarity. He descended with practiced precision, dropping to 500 feet, skimming the surface of the Hudson River, its waters glinting like hammered silver under the morning sunday. He wove through the crowded airspace, a daredevil dance between the iconic skyline and the river below, deftly navigating around news choppers and private jets. His call sign, once just a bureaucratic identifier, now carried an unexpected weight, causing other aircraft to scatter, giving him a wide berth as they recognized the sheer skill of the pilot. Inside the cabin, utterly oblivious to the high-stakes aerial maneuvers, the prince's briefcase remained rock-steady, a testament to Jack's smooth control. His hand, resting lightly on the cyclic, never trembled, his movements fluid and intuitive. The world outside was a blur of motion, but within the cockpit there was an almost meditative calm. At 1,400 feet, his keen eyes spotted it, the distinctive rooftop helipad of the investment firm, a tiny, precise target amidst the towering concrete jungle of Lower Manhattan. Without a moment's hesitation, he dropped the collective, a subtle yet powerful adjustment, and pirouetted the helicopter 90 degrees, aligning it perfectly with the landing zone. The MD-902 descended with an almost ethereal grace, touching down with a kiss that barely compressed the skids, a landing so soft it felt less like an impact and more like a whisper. Total flight time, an astonishing 18 minutes. He had shaved 7 crucial minutes off Claire's already impossible deadline. With the engine still winding down, he pulled out his phone, snapped a quick photo of the GPS log, complete, with timestamp and coordinates, and sent it to Claire's number. Then, with the same casual confidence, he radioed back to Teterboro. Package delivered. Returning to base. The words hung in the air, a quiet announcement of a monumental victory, delivered with the understated professionalism of a man who had simply done his job. Claire stared at her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as they clutched the device. The photo on the screen was undeniable, a timestamp confirming the impossibly fast delivery, the precise coordinates of the rooftop helipad, and then, the coup de grace, a selfie of the Arab prince, beaming. Shaking hands with the CFO, the precious briefcase securely in his grasp. $4 billion. Just like that, it had landed safely, secured by the very man she'd mocked moments before. The sheer weight of that number, the enormity of the deal he'd saved, pressed down on her. Her VP, Peterson, who had rushed to her side, whispered, his voice laced with awe. "That's not beginner's luck, Claire. Not even close." But Claire didn't answer. Words felt suddenly heavy, cumbersome, inadequate to express the maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. Humiliation, astonishment, a grudging respect, and a burgeoning curiosity all warred for dominance. She watched the sky, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, waiting for the MD 902 to reappear. When it finally did, a tiny speck growing larger against the backdrop of the city, Jack brought it in hot, a controlled, powerful descent. He flared the helicopter with breathtaking precision, settling it onto the pad with an almost defiant grace, then throttled down the engines. The roar slowly subsided, replaced by the diminishing whine of the turbines, until finally, the massive blades wound down to a whisper, the last rotations, a gentle sigh in the morning air. He stepped out of the cockpit, his faded coveralls flapping lightly in the residual breeze, and removed the headset, hanging it carefully on a hook. The hangar, once buzzing with nervous energy, was now eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic drip of residual fuel from the helicopter's underbelly, a tiny punctuation mark in the profound silence. Claire walked toward him, her expensive heels, usually so confident, now seemed uncertain, her steps hesitant. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, stripped of its usual authority. "Who are you?" Jack, unhurried, reached down and wiped a smudge from the gleaming fuselage of the MD 902. He looked up, meeting her gaze with those quiet, knowing eyes. "Used to fly for the 160th, he said, his voice flat, devoid of boast. "Got tired of people shooting at me, so I took a job where the only thing flying is gossip." The silence that followed Jack's revelation was deafening, a vacuum created by the collective shock of the executives. Then, as if on cue, a flurry of hushed whispers and frantic phone tapping broke the spell. Someone, probably a tech-savvy junior executive, quickly Googled 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Within seconds, the search results flashed across multiple smartphone screens, illuminating faces with a stark, almost reverent light. The phrase Night Stalkers appeared, bold and undeniable, a name synonymous with elite, covert operations, pilots who flew into the most dangerous hot zones imaginable, often under the cloak of darkness. Claire's mouth opened, then closed, her carefully constructed composure utterly shattered. She remembered her dare, the casual cruelty of her words, and a wave of heat crawled up her neck, a flush of acute embarrassment. The mockery, the condescension, it all came flooding back, now tinged with a profound sense of foolishness. Jack, ever the professional, extended the flight release to her, a crisp, official document. All the boxes were checked, the mission parameters met, the task undeniably complete. "You don't have to marry me, ma'am," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible glint of humor in his eyes. "I just needed the flight hours." The executives, relieved by the tension-breaking quip, burst into nervous, slightly hysterical laughter, a release of the immense pressure that had built up. Claire, however, didn't join them. She couldn't. Her gaze remained fixed on Jack, on the man who, with a borrowed uniform and a lifetime of forgotten skill, had just salvaged her $4 billion empire. For the first time since the exhilarating chaos of her IPO launch day, she felt small. Not diminished or insignificant, but small in the best possible way, humbled, enlightened, and utterly captivated by the quiet strength standing before her. She saw not a janitor, but a hero, a a man whose true capacity had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to soar. That evening, the air in Claire Hawthorne's executive office was thick with the scent of ambition and a faint hint of humility. She sat at her gleaming mahogany desk, a rare smile playing on her lips. Don't miss out on the next incredible journey. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next time the underdog lifts off and proves everyone wrong. The moral? Never ever judge a job title by its name tag. The quiet guy pushing the mop might just be the same individual who once pushed the edge of the envelope at 200 knots, flying through hostile skies. And if you're audacious enough to dare him to fly, you better be ready for the consequences, because the sky, in its infinite wisdom, has a rather poetic habit of handing a hefty dose of humility to those who mistakenly think they own it.